Welcome to the Making Writing Accessible webinar series hosted by the Write site. This webinar will be the first in a series of 4 webinars that breaks down the writing process. Today we will be talking about the writing process as an academic strategy. The next webinar will focus on the first phase, planning, which includes understanding assignment instructions, planning and pre-writing, and researching and developing ideas. The next webinar after that will be on drafting, outlining, and writing the paper, and the final webinar on polishing, which includes revising, editing, and proofreading. But first, let's talk about why a writing process. It's because writing is the most common form of academic expression. Your written expression demonstrates your competency of the subject, your comprehension of the material, and your ability to think critically. There are other forms of academic expression, but they are less common, such as video, visual, audio, or digital assignments, oral presentations, or producing an artistic artifact. Therefore, having a strategy to manage the writing tasks at university will help with productivity, time management, and efficiency. You will encounter a variety of writing tasks in your academic journey. The writing process can be used for all of them. This is not an exhaustive list, but generally, you'll face short assignments in the 300 to 800 word range, like blogs, discussion posts, questions and answers, reflections, speeches, emails, wikis, and social media posts. Common papers at the undergraduate level, especially at the 1, 2, and 300 level, are papers in the 1,000 to 2,500 word range, such as essays, reports, reviews, and critiques. Longer papers of 3,000 to 6,000 words typically appear in the higher levels of undergraduate study, like at the 300, 400, or 500 level, and include research papers and term papers. These are papers that show cumulative learning over the duration of your course. So they're usually the final assignment and worth the most. And then ultra-long papers of 6,000 words plus are typically found at the graduate level with a thesis, dissertation, or manuscript, and these papers can take years to complete. Regardless of the task, you can adapt the writing process to the scale of your assignment. For instance, the planning phase could take 18 months to 2 years for a doctoral student, but only 5 minutes if trying to locate an attachment for a professional email. Thus, short writing tasks could go through the entire writing process in under an hour or several hours. Common and longer essays may take weeks, and the ultra-long paper could take years. But what about essay-based exams? You can still use the writing process. Let's look at an example. You want to plan your exam by reserving time to plan ideas out on a scrap piece of paper. Turn those ideas into an outline to help you write the essay, and then revise, edit, and proofread the essay now, not at the end of the exam. You want to do this in order to move on to the next writing task. Let's look at it a different way. It's called closing the loop. This means that, let's say for the English 255 exam, it has 4 writing tasks. This means we're going to complete each task by closing the loop, starting at looking at the instructions for what we need to do, all the way through to proofreading, and then move on to the second writing task. The reason for this is that if you wait until the very end to go back to the beginning to start revising, editing, and proofreading, you're going to waste time, and we know time is precious on exams, because you have to reorient yourself to that writing task. You might need to reread a couple of things, reread what you've written just to remember what you were thinking when you were writing that. It's wise to focus on one task at a time, finish it up, and then move on. Now, of course, if you have moved on and then that buzzword or that terminology just comes to you, of course, go back and fill it in. But we're talking about big changes, structural changes. You don't want to be doing that at the end of the paper, returning to those initial tasks. So let's say you're starting with the 500 to 600 word essay. You're going to read the instructions, plan out some basic ideas for what you think you could talk about, maybe come up with your thesis statement, then maybe jot down what points you want to make into in the body paragraphs, transfer that into writing the draft, and then reread it right then, looking for spelling, mechanical, and flow errors. And then once you've read it through, maybe 1 or 2 times if time allows, then you're ready to move to the summary. The writing process is also a transferable skill that you can apply to professional writing, like a cover letter. We can learn professional writing skills through each stage of the writing process. So for instance, when understanding assignment instructions, we may need to contact our instructor to clarify details. This is our chance to initiate a professional relationship with the instructor by using formal and professional language. One way to do this is to use an AU email address because it has a standardized format to it. And if it's a virtual call, you want to blur your background to turn your personal space into a professional one. In the planning and developing ideas stage, this is where we develop critical thinking skills. And this is also where academic integrity issues can surface. So, for instance, plagiarism includes copying and pasting content from another source without citing it, but giving credit where credit is due when the original thought is not ours is essential in crafting a professional piece of communication. When it comes to writing, use Office 365 that is available to you as a student to create a professional presentation. Depending on your academic discipline, your paper will need to be formatted according to a style like APA or MLA. These guidelines standardize your paper, ensuring that it's professionally formatted. You also want to outline your ideas before writing, because this makes sure that you organize your thoughts before communicating. And then finally, always look over your writing before submitting a paper or sending an email. Not even the world's most successful authors write a single draft and send it off to be published. Review your paper for content, structure, mechanics, grammar, style, and documentation. Importantly, prioritize scholarly voice in all communications, whether it's an email or an essay, and treat instructors and staff professionally. You all share the same professional environment. Why is the writing process important? The writing process supports students throughout the writing experience. It's important because it can help students with writer's block or feeling stuck because it indicates what to do next. It helps students organize their schedules, shows students that writing is just one part of the essay process, encourages students to plan for revision, editing, and proofreading, which can make a significant difference to the overall quality of the paper, and helps students become more confident and independent. However, we may have concerns about writing, and this may be due to receiving poorly worded, negative, or unhelpful feedback in the past, having an undiagnosed learning disability or a diagnosed disability that is reading or writing focused, feeling overwhelmed by the act of writing, being a new learner of the English language, struggling with academic anxiety, feelings of intellectual inadequacy, comparing ourselves to other people and not feeling like we're a natural writer, or feeling discouraged when asked to do remedial work. These concerns around writing can create significant academic barriers to learning, such as academic test anxiety, procrastination, feelings of defeat and discouragement, writer's block, a negative self-perception that I'm a bad writer, perfectionism, fear of criticism and feedback, or resorting to academic dishonesty. The writing process can help cope with these concerns because it guides and supports the writers through each step. But what if I truly hate writing? Well, there are strategies you can use for the process that aren't writing heavy. For instance, for understanding assignment instructions, you can watch YouTube videos about the assignment format. For planning and pre-writing, you could use creative visual strategies like mind maps or graphic organizers. When researching ideas, you could use citation managers to help with organizing and highlighting quotes. For outlining, you could use a graphic organizer and watch the third webinar, which will go into this in a lot more detail. Maybe for writing, you want to consider dictating or using a speech-to-text tool. As well, if writing is a frustrating activity for you, create low word count targets, 200 to 250 words a day. It's easy to write a small amount, and then it gives you a feeling of achievement without it becoming a frustrating experience. For revising, editing, and proofreading, having a reader, going to the right site, or even reading your work out loud can all help you catch errors that you might have missed the first time around. But when we're talking about weaknesses and our concerns with writing, let's also talk about our strengths. Because even if writing is not a strength, you might have strengths in other parts of the writing process. For example, in the planning stage, perhaps you are in nursing and you have professional expertise. This might help you understand assignment instructions and think about how you want to answer the assignment or apply your professional experience to the topics. If you're a very organized person, you might enjoy planning. And likewise, if you are a natural, curious person and you enjoy researching, developing ideas might be an easier part of the writing process for you. With outline, we're basically categorizing and sorting all the information we gathered in the planning phase into a structured outline. So if you're a good sorter or categorizer, that might be the one for you. Some people really just like to write, and that might make the first draft quite easy compared to other parts of the writing process. And then for the last phase, the polishing phase, perhaps you're more of a creative person. You might like that revision process where you can really shape the language, do some wordsmithing. Or perhaps you're also detail oriented, and that's the perfect personality for editing and proofreading and looking for those really, really specific details that can make the difference in your grade. Now, we also need to prepare the mind to write. And this means starting to think about your scholarly perspective. Remember that the way you view the world is unique. This unique viewpoint is called a worldview, and it is shaped by a variety of factors like how you were raised, world events you've been through, travel, where you live, your relationship with religion. All of these experiences and factors shape the way you view the world, and this influences how you write. Our brains are always changing, however, so our worldview will therefore change. This is called neuroplasticity, and it's the ability of the brain to change through growth. So if you've gone through a significant experience like travel or the birth of a baby, this influences how you view the world. This will inform the perspective from which you write. And another way that our worldview grows is through critical thinking. When we start to think critically about what we read, study, consume, and write about, we are developing our brains as well as our writing voice. Critical thinking is the objective analysis of an issue to form a judgment that expands our worldview. Another way to think about it is when you're reading something or watching something, the little voice in your head that's questioning, like, oh, what does this mean? Or, oh, I don't know if I agree with this. Those are the beginning seeds of a critical thought. One way to develop critical thinking skills in your course is to consider different perspectives. In the humanities, so let's say English, for example, you may have a novel like Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. But we're not just going to read it just as a novel, but we might read it through a specific lens. For instance, if you had 8 different people reading this novel and each one read it from a different lens, think about what that would create and the different critical thought it would generate. So for instance, if I read it from a feminist lens compared to somebody who read it from a post-colonial lens, what different meanings would we find by trying this different perspective? Regardless of your discipline, you will be introduced to different theoretical approaches in your undergraduate study. Some will align with your worldview or change your worldview, and some will not resonate. This is how you develop your scholarly identity, which will help define your writer's voice. When reading, think, when was it published? Does it build on the ideas of previous scholars? How is it advancing scientific literature? What are the strengths, the limitations, the gaps in the literature? And you might hear this phrase a lot, gaps in the literature. And what this means is that of all the scholarship that's out there, maybe there's something that's overlooked or ignored or not looked at with enough depth. Let's say, for instance, people with disabilities. They're just not represented in the literature to the degree that they should be. That would be a gap in the literature. As you're reading, consider the credibility of the authors. Where do they work? How does this influence the discipline? And another thing to think is, why now? Why is this research important right now in today's society? You will also have the opportunity to study outside your discipline. And while this may be frustrating, it can help with writing because learning from different disciplines strengthens our critical thinking skills. This is why most undergraduate programs have mandatory electives. For instance, in my English degree, I had to take a couple of science courses, or many of you in the health disciplines have to take humanities courses. Interdisciplinary learning creates a more well-rounded thinker. Interdisciplinarity means transferring learning from across different disciplines. For instance, you may learn about social determinants of health in legal studies, nursing, education, and criminal justice, but just in different ways. You may learn about the Victorian age in English, but also in history or music. This helps us to make connections and apply our ideas to different contexts. Once you take some courses, you may discover that there are certain aspects to learning that you really like. Maybe you discover that you enjoy English or biology. This doesn't mean that you're going to love every English or biology course, but following your instincts, or what the famous mythologist Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss, can be beneficial. It can help you commit to a discipline, develop research interests, and build expertise. Even more importantly, writing about subjects we care about makes writing so much easier. However, you may not have found your bliss quite yet, and that's okay. There is no straight line in university, no one way to be a student, and certainly no ideal student. But you could begin thinking about bliss by asking yourself, what interests you? What do you love reading about? What are your favorite activities? What do you binge watch? What areas of a newspaper would you go to first? Why are you in university? This reflection might help you figure out what holds your attention, what matters to you, what you're passionate about. And this can inform your program choices and what you want to write about. And this can help start the writing process. If you are a mature learner, develop confidence in your writing. Your maturity will set you apart. You know yourself, and that will help create a defined writer's voice. You have work, life, and even crisis experience, which will translate into your professionalism as a student and how your insights are developed and nuanced. You also have experience communicating. Maybe this is through work emails, delivering presentations, that sort of thing helps define that professional tone that will also create that scholarly voice. You don't have to be a mature learner to write with sensitivity and empathy, but your life experience gives you a unique perspective because of what you have survived, endured, produced, created, and experienced. Now, reading is a key way to preparing your mind to write. It puts language in your head that can help you form opinions to write about. You can read in a variety of ways, online or print, using an e-reader, which, if it's feasible, can be helpful for English language learners, as you can click on words for definitions. You're reading both academic articles and fiction, nonfiction opinions, or news sites. As you read, pay attention to frequently mentioned writers, concepts, ideas, trends, and attitudes, as this may be something you can write about. And reading doesn't have to involve printed text. Maybe you're more of an audio learner. Try audiobooks or podcasts. Or perhaps as you are reading, you come across a concept you're struggling with. Maybe there's a legit YouTube site that can present it to you in a different way. It's still reading. Now, there are some reading techniques that might help you out. The first one is called SQ3R. And in this technique, you first look at the text just to prepare your mind, just get a sense of what's involved. How many pages is it, for example? As you read, you're going to ask yourself some questions. And then when you're done reading, you want to ask yourself, did you answer the questions that you have? Like, one question could be, is this relevant to my research question? When you finish reading the article, the answer might be no. And then once you're finished answering your questions, think about or reflect, what did you learn from this paper? Maybe you learned that there's a limitation or a recommendation for research, or maybe you learned a key terminology that you want to reference in your own paper. Another kind of reading technique is skimming. So this is kind of like the first S in SQ3R, surveying the text. This is glancing over the materials to find what you're looking for. It's a little different than scanning. So let's say I'm looking for a bolded, the method section. Then I would scan through the paper looking specifically for that word. Active reading is reading and thinking critically about what you're reading and paying attention to those critical questions that come up as you read. And then detailed reading is another read through that is very focused. This is where you're looking for quotes or quotes to paraphrase, evidence for your writing. Remember that reading and writing go together like peanut butter and jelly. The more you read, the more you know. Reading helps with language acquisition, learning new vocabulary, learning mechanics, syntax, sentence structure, grammar, and style in English, developing your imagination, making connections, observing different expressions of voice. And importantly, the more you read, the better you write. Keeping a journal is an effective way to getting your mind prepared to write. Keeping a journal is your own set of rules. It's judgment-free. You can write one line, you can write 4 pages, you can use bullet points. The point here is that it helps you process your ideas. So for a reading journal, you could track what caught your attention in your readings. Even writing a few sentences on a theme could result in a phrase you could use in a future essay. When brainstorming ideas, you could use a free online mind map software or get an online sketchbook or journal to visually think out your ideas. A research journal is very useful as you can use your impressions in a paper, but you can also refer back to your record if the topic is something you want to explore in more detail. A reflection journal is the place to think about problems. How are you feeling? How are you liking your course? It's a way to check in with yourself. No one is reading this, so consider using them as a way to explore issues and problems and concerns. How can I prepare to write? Another thing you can do is to get a print copy of the documentation style of your discipline. So if you're in the humanities, English, music, philosophy, fine arts, MLA is the typical documentation style. If you're in a human profession, nursing, social work, education, psychology, APA is the go-to documentation style. In history, law, and business, Chicago is the style there. You can also find a trusty reader. They don't have to be in your discipline, but somebody that you know who can give you helpful, constructive feedback. Using an assignment calculator can help you plan out what exactly you're writing and when. You can come to our webinar series and writing forums as ways to work through writing issues, or book an appointment with a writing coach to discuss your relationship to writing. As well, it's really important to remember to ask your tutor if you have questions. So let's just talk about your tutor for a second. This should be your first point of contact. Don't feel shy about contacting your tutor with questions. This is what they're there for. Email them, introduce yourself, ask for clarification. This way you initiate a relationship with them. At AU, there's different terminology for instructor. So you're going to see the word tutor, possibly an individualized or a group study tutor. This does not mean a peer tutor like you were in high school. It means a person who has academic expertise in that field, usually a PhD. They are the ones who are grading your papers. You may also have your instructor be an assistant or a full professor. They may also go by other names like a subject expert, a content expert, or a coach. You may be in a course that has a practicum component, so you may have a coordinator that will be your first point of contact. Or you might be in a very large course with a course lead and several teaching assistants, and then that teaching assistant would be the first person to ask. The academic coordinator is the person who runs the course, and the program director or chair runs the program. And this link will help you search for your instructor, and it'll give you their phone number and email so that you know how to contact them. One topic you may want to discuss with your tutor is AI. First, I encourage you to read Dr. Prinius's latest post on AI and how AU is managing it. As we await formal guidelines, ask your tutor how they feel about AI. You can also visit us at the right site for support. You can also register in our academic integrity webinars that run several times a year. This is a link for how the documentation styles, so APA, MLA, and Chicago, are dealing with AI. And as Dr. Prinius says, AI should never be the author. The student remains the author. But why do people plagiarize in the first place? Well, there's intentional plagiarism, which usually comes down to academic stress. It's these feelings of pressure and deadlines and needing a specific grade and feeling a lack of confidence in writing that could lead someone to commit plagiarism. And then there is intentional plagiarism where someone is intentionally purchasing an essay to submit or having someone write an essay on their behalf and submitting it as their own. But there's also unintentional plagiarism, and this can come from it being the first time you're writing a paper in a long time. Perhaps you're not familiar with the documentation style. You don't understand how to cite. Perhaps you don't understand the difference between common knowledge and a claim and which one needs to be cited, or you're not knowing how to use AI. It's important that if you feel or suspect unintentional plagiarism, that you can come and talk to us at the right site, and we can help you with paraphrasing strategies so that you know that you're doing those activities correctly. One stressor of plagiarism is grades. So let's just take a quick look at how grades work at Athabasca. So you'll see that there's a description on the left from failure to excellent and how it correlates to the alpha grade of F to A+. This then correlates to the 4-point scale of 0 to 4.0, and then of course the percentage range. So if you see that you get a grade that's 72, for instance, and you feel like it's really low, take a look at the undergraduate grade scale and look at the whole picture, because actually 72 is good and it's in the B range. So maybe that'll change your perspective and minimize the intensity of stress around grades. Another way to think about it is in decades. So the D's are the 50s, the C's are in the 60s, B's in the 70s, and A's are 80 to 100, with the A+ being 90 to 100. And we can help you, as I've been mentioning, at the right site. Here are some of our services. So we have a weekly forum on Thursdays from 12:30 to 1:30 MST. This is just an open forum for students to come and ask questions about writing. We have real-time coaching appointments, or you can submit your paper to our Dropbox for written feedback. We have a blog, a grammar handbook, and all of this can be found on our website, including how to email us. We also have a webinar series upcoming in the fall, are these remaining webinars, and of course we're going to be re-hosting them again in the winter. So let's just review. The writing process has 3 phases: planning, understanding your assignment instructions, planning and pre-writing, researching and developing ideas, then drafting, outlining and writing, and then polishing, revising, editing, and proofreading. Our next webinar is going to look at the planning phase. So I hope that you come and take a look at that webinar. But remember this as a final note, that writing is a skill that takes practice.